Hi, and welcome to Real Talk, and we're going to be talking about our perspectives on women in cinema. I'm Apple,
I'm
I'm
Andrea.
Alexia.
I'm Darby.
and today we're going to specifically compare two films by women directors that span different areas but share approaches to gender norms. So we're going to be looking into Mai Zetterling's 1968 film The Girls and Anna Lily Amirpour's 2014 film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Okay, immediately after I watched these films, I thought it was interesting because both of them had like the black and white elements, and also both of them were in non-English languages. But for some reason, it was a lot easier for me to follow A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night. And I thought it was more interesting overall. And I think that's just interesting because in class we talk about how language in like black and white makes it harder to understand, but for me the Girls was really difficult to understand and it was confusing at a lot of parts.
I completely agree. I feel like even though they're both black and white and in different languages, the plot to The Girls was a lot harder to follow because there was just so many different scenes that flash back to their dream sequences, and at first when I was watching it I was like, what's going on? And then the subtitles wouldn't match up either, so I was like, whoa, where did we just the scene just completely changed, lost. Whereas The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, it has a central plot and you can follow it, and even if it's another language. So I definitely agree with that because The Girls was a lot more complex in that sense as The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night.
Oh, for sure. Especially how both of the films really talk about how important female representation in cinema is. And especially how they're females themselves. It really shows the different feminist themes that they experience, as well as showing sexist experiences during the films. And so because of that, because of the different directors and different minorities that we're experiencing, we'll be looking at everything from camera angles to the costume designs to the sound that really shapes what the film was like and how it really put all together to what we saw on these movies.
And throughout our podcast, we're gonna just come back to the main question that we're focusing on, and that is how the directors use the black and white films to go against the typical new standard movie rules, sort of, and push back how men are usually show women in films, and kind of create a new way to present women's experiences. All right, so we're gonna start with Mai Zetterling's The Girls from 1968. To talk a little bit about the movie, the Swedish film kind of follows three main actresses. So we have Liz, who realizes that her husband's having an affair, Marianne, who is a single mother, and Gunilla, who is a mother of 4 children, and they kind of tour Sweden, performing this Aristophanes ancient Greek comedy called Lystrata.
Yeah, also for context, this film was emerging during the second wave of feminism, which is late 60s. And I remember reading that the women were increasingly questioning traditional roles, but then also mainstream society was still really resistant to these roles and them questioning it. So the film was not received well at first. But we have this clip from 1520 that we can show.
Barn. Ja. Men om vi nu gör som du säger, och himlen det förbjuder, garanterar du då att det kan bli fred?
Ja, gör det.
Jag är alldeles säker. Hör här.
Vi ska gå omkring där hemma.
Och så rinner du ut på scenen.
So this clip shows how Zetterling creates these interesting parallels between the ancient play that they're performing, the Lysistrata one, where the women were withholding sex in order to end a war, and then it was contrasting with the modern woman's perspective, and then the struggles with the men in their lives, which stood out to me personally because I was watching this from the contemporary lens, and it made me think about the timeline and how far apart it felt on the timeline, but how these issues were still really present, and it's been more than 50 years since then.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Darby, because I guess Zetterling was one of the first few women directors in that time period, and how that critical perspective on gender expectations wasn't really embraced immediately. I know this film, like at the time when it was released, faced a lot of controversy and backlash, for especially how they were talking about how women's roles were really showing, and it showed that it was this groundbreaking social commentary about how women were being portrayed, and even discussing in class that how film and acting and this whole Hollywood scene was really created by women and minorities to pass the time and to show a different way to express themselves, like as different type of media. And because of this, even though this industry was made by women, again, they were pushed by the side and this industry was taken over by men, which is really interesting to kind of see how that roles were reversed in the end.
So yeah, I agree. Talking about how women were portrayed, this clip that we're about to play, I think is one of the most important scenes, and I think it shows really deeply how Zetterling kind of sees how women are portrayed in films and movies. So let's watch this clip at 56:50, where the actresses are throwing their clothes at the men. Nixie, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So in this like scene, the first time I watched it, I was like so shocked and I was like kind of confused at like why these like girls were just like starting to like take their clothes off. But then like seeing it again with like that like perspective of like the time era it was set in, and then like seeing like the reactions from the audience. I know specifically like one of the guys was like, he was like, oh my gosh, like they're taking their clothes off, until he like realized it was like, I think it was like his wife. So then like it kind of shows that like, oh, at first it was like okay if it was like another girl, but because it was his wife, then like all of a sudden like yeah, he realized like, oh wait, this isn't okay that they start like stripping. But like yeah, so that scene in general, it kind of like shows their like female empowerment. Like they had power over themselves and over their bodies, and they were kind of like, yeah, this is what we're doing right now. And if it's like you like, it was like, I don't know, it kind of gave that sense of like power to them, and they felt, you could tell like in the actresses themselves, whether they were acting or not, they felt that like female power, that whole like it gave like a feminist movement in a sense.
Yeah, let's play this clip right now.
Ja, men det är min hustru. Men fattar ni inte? Har du tagit åt henne?
You know, I came across this like really interesting article by Mariah Larson about the girls, and it's called The Swedish Hotbed. And what was like really cool to me was how like Zetterling wasn't really like tackling the gender issues or like roles and stuff, but she was like breaking down all the rules about how movies should be structured. Like she, like when she made the film, she kind of just like threw together these fantasy sequences like with reality, and then like mixed in scenes from like the actual play that they're performing, and it like created this like really blurred line between like what was real and what wasn't. And those dream sequences, like the story just like doesn't follow a straight line, which was super duper like just something that they weren't in the 60s, they weren't used to. Like audiences back then weren't like they just weren't used to seeing like that type of like approach in cinema, which I found really cool.
I completely agree, Apple. Like I feel like even watching this today, I was still like kind of shocked at like how advanced I guess her way of thinking was, especially because like this movie was filmed so long ago. I can't imagine, like I kind of understand why there was so much pushback when it first came out, because it was shocking, like that, like the way that she structured the film. Again, because like there was so many times where like I was like, wait, is this from the play? Is this from their real life? Like what's going on here? So definitely there was a lot of like those blurred lines of reality of like, okay, wait, is this from a dream sequence? Is this something that happened in their real life? Is this both? It was very interesting, and like I was interested to watch it, even though it confused me at times. I still found myself like really enjoying watching the film.
Yeah, I think we all did. That was super cool.
Okay, I think this is a good time to segue into our next film, which is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, directed by Anna Lily Amirpour, and this film was from 2014. I think it's interesting because this film approaches gender in a really different angle compared to Zetterlings, but I think we can still find some parallels and similarities.
Oh, for sure. Since this is an Iranian American film, the whole movie takes place in a fictional setting called The Bad City, where we follow a nameless female vampire who preys specifically on men who exploit women. And as this is described as the first Iranian vampire Western movie, it really shows how Amirpour blends different genres in different ways. I wouldn't have expected how a vampire would be shown into these typical settings, and it shows how the series topic is created in Iran, but due to the movie legalities in Iran, it can't be even shown in a country where it's supposed to be centered in. I believe it was filmed in California, so it's interesting to see how we still are able to talk about topics that are apparent into that society while still facing the challenges that a lot of the women face in that culture.
Yeah, so even though it's censored, unlike The Girls, the movie was like a big hit with critics. I know it was premiered at Sundance and it got like a bunch of praise for like the unique and different style of its like filmmaking and like the feminist perspective. And like growing up, I feel like I just watched horror movies like that were made by men. So like seeing one completely from a woman's point of view was so different, and it was just so crazy because like it completely just shifted how I saw like the genre, and it just made me realize like how different and fresh like horror can feel when it comes from like a completely new perspective. Anixia, do you want to talk about like some of the film?
Oh, yeah, of course. Sorry. So this film, it stars Miss Sheila Vand, and she's like the girl, but she doesn't have a name throughout the film. Like they never like specifically give her a name. We kind of just like know her as like the girl or like the vampire. And she, along with Arash and the other characters, they're like in this like desolate town where like death and like everything is kind of like normal. I mean, like even in like the opening scene, we see our main character, he's like walking past this like ditch in a way, and it's just like full of dead bodies, and I think someone in the background's like even adding another one. So yeah, this town is definitely like centered around like dark like death and like decay. So that was really interesting to like see. Like I wasn't expecting that, especially like right off the bat. And then like as the movie got on, it was kind of honestly really gory too. Like the first scene where we see like the vampire, or like when she's like dealing with like the drug dealer and she like bites his finger off and then like completely goes to like eat him in a way, that was really like gory for me. And like I've seen horror movies that are kind of like that, but this one was just like different in the sense, and then like the black and white gave it more of that eerie film.
Yeah, I agree. I felt the eeriness from the start, and from the title itself, I wasn't expecting this type of horror movie, and it was definitely different when I was watching it. So I think we should take a look at a quick scene at 37:15 and dive into how the director establishes the atmosphere and the visual language in the film. Okay, I love this clip because it kind of shows this girl as like a superhero. It's really dark, and then her scarf is like looking like a cape while she's riding the skateboard, and it's focused on her, but like the darkness of the scene is still giving that eerie feel to the film. And it kind of struck me how the director inverts the traditional horror trope when usually it's the men, it's focused on men when there's like gender-based violence. Usually the men are the predators. But this scene is like the first introduction where it's the female predator, and like she's empowered and she's like by herself at night, but she's like going through the city to do her kind of like heroic work, which is a little twisted, but I love this scene.
Oh yeah, I really liked that scene too. And I think something that was really similar to that, that highlighted the message throughout the film, was when Saeed was looking at the girl, and the camera work is really telling of the story and the timeline, where there's a sense of like creepiness and eeriness of what is really going on in that environment. And throughout the scenes, there's a very small amount of words that are exchanged and glances, and where the camera angles were shifting, but yet so much has happened. So let's take a watch at this clip.
All right, so like this scene is such a good example of like the male gaze that Andre was talking about earlier. Just like the way the camera lingers on Syed and how like he looks at the girl, I just feel like it's just so totally like objectifying her. And then just like his throat tattoo that literally just says sex right there in the frame, it's just making it like super clear how he sees her like as nothing but sex. Like he just sees her nothing more than that. And then boom, like everything flips, and this is like the first time we actually see the girl kill. And suddenly the predator now becomes the prey. And it's just like a cool, unexpected shift that I feel like, at least I didn't realize that was going to happen.
No, yeah, Apple, I like completely agree with you. Like, I was like shocked. Like the scene before that, she's kind of like, she was like dancing in her room. Like you can kind of tell, like she was like, and essentially like doing like a get ready with me to go murder this guy in a way. Like she was like listening to her music, she was feeling herself, and then she like goes out and it's like a whole new person. Like she like essentially like put on like a character, and she like went to him. She like didn't even have to say anything. He just kind of like assumed she was ready for like whatever, and he literally just takes her to his house, no problems, no questions asked, and she literally doesn't speak at all. Like the whole time in that scene, she doesn't say a word. And then like we see her attack him, and it's like, it wasn't like I was like expecting it, because I don't know, like it, like you felt like that buildup, but then like actually seeing it happen was kind of crazy. And so like the director really did a great job at like that, like building that atmosphere of like a classic horror movie, like of like, you know what's gonna happen, but you don't know what's gonna happen until like you actually see it. And so it was definitely an unexpected shift, and it definitely showed like her like vigilante style of, oh, here he was literally doing drugs in front of her too, so you can definitely tell like she like was gaining her like evidence on like, yeah, he definitely needs to be like murdered, like he's done.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think another element that plays into the overall feel of the film is the soundtrack. And I think it played a pretty crucial role in this film, because it was actually like contemporary Iranian rock music that was playing in the background and that the girl was dancing to, which creates like a dissonance because the setting is pretty traditional, but then the music is very modern.
Oh, for sure. I think to compare it to the article about the feminist vampires reconfiguring the monstrous feminine in contemporary cinema, Sarah Pearson really discussed how the vampires subvert traditional representations of female monsters by showing how she chooses her victims based on the treatment of the women rather than being portrayed as a force of nature, of sexuality. So instead of how women are being victims in a traditional horror movie sequence where they're the damsel in distress, or they're usually the ones that get taken alive first, the roles are reversed to show how much power women are able to take back, where women are the least expected to be violent, and yet she was the one to be feared amongst the men, which is really interesting to see how the roles were reversed, and is really, really interesting to see.
So now that we've both talked about both films like separately and on their own, let's kind of like put them side by side and compare them. So like something that really stood out to me was like how they both used black and white cinematography. Like even though they were made like so far apart, like they were just made like decades apart. Like Anixia, like why do you think they went with that choice, and like what do you think it adds to like the overall theme?
Yeah, well, I think for both directors, like the use of black and white was definitely like a stylistic choice. like especially because they were filmed in like eras where like color was an option. I think it kind of gave their films more of like an emphasis on like a more serious tone as well. I feel like even if it was in color, it would have been fine. But I think the black and white really added that like sense of like a stronger visual, or like I don't know, like a contrast as opposed to like color films. I feel like for me, I kind of felt like I had to pay more attention because it was in black and white and because it was in another language. But like I don't know, I think the black and white just like really captured my attention. And so like I think maybe like one of the reasons they chose it was because they knew it was like something different than like if the movie was just filmed in color.
For sure. I think it's funny, before this class, whenever I saw a black and white film, I kind of just assumed it was really old and they just didn't have color. But learning that both of these films were made during a time when like color was an option, it just adds to the intention and purpose behind the film. Which I think another interesting element was the fantasy or like dreamlike sequences that occurred in both. So for Zetterling, it was when the actresses had like internal fantasies, the backgrounds and setting didn't really match up with what was going on, so you could tell that was like a dreamlike sequence. And then for the other film, it was obviously when like her vampire fangs came out and when she started to become violent, that's when the fantasy played a part in it. So yeah, these like non-realistic elements allowed the directors to comment on reality, I think, just more freely, and it gives them some creative freedom.
For sure, I definitely took notice in that, and how not only the film plays a role in that, but as well as the different languages that were being spoken to. Both films were not in English, so Swedish was the girls and Farsi was A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and placing them outside of the mainstream Hollywood typical outtake, and it really showed for more of a radical perspective overall. Because of the lack of English throughout the films, we had to really watch the subtitles and making sure that the subtitles aligned with what they were trying to say. And it really created a language barrier that kind of affected my way of understanding the film. Apple, did you also find this struggle?
Actually, yeah, I did. When we first went into this class, the first movie that we played was Cleo to 5 to 7. And obviously that was the first movie I've watched, one in black and white, but two in a different language. So just having the first movie start off being in like a different language completely, like definitely kind of just taught me what to prepare for like going on this class. And I just feel like the subtitles made me focus way more on like the visuals, which was super duper interesting. Like the way both these films were received is like, it just shows so much about each like movie. Like the girls, when it was first like out, it was just like dismissed and like later got recognition at this like important like as this like important feminist film after. But like A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night was praised just like right away, which was like crazy. And I was like pretty interesting to me, and like that just kind of shows the way how we see women's stories in film and how it changed in time.
Yeah, Apple, I think like you brought up like a really good point. And like I'd also like to point out like how like both of these films are dealing with like rebellion against like not just patriarchal like norms, but like just like gender norms in general, but through like very different like ways. Like for example, like the girls, it's like we see like a group of women standing up to like the norms. Like it's like in that scene where they start like undressing, like it's like multiple of them, whereas like in like The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, Hamnipur kind of just like focus on that individual like justice of like it's just one woman, but she's still just as powerful as like a group of women. And like yeah, it just really made me like wonder, and I guess I'd like to ask the audience listening to us, has this like these films made you think about like the nature of like has the nature of feminist resistance like changed from like collective moments of like the 1960s to like a more individualized like form today? So yeah, I think I'd like to leave like the audience with like that question.
Okay, to wrap up, I kind of want to share what stood out to me most about the films. I think I was most struck by how each of the different directors created distinct languages within these feminist perspectives. And the films are really, really different in their genres, in storyline and plot and everything. But both of them frame it in a way to show solidarity and just female empowerment. And something that it just reminded me of, thinking of the title of these films, specifically Amirpours, it reminded me of like, if you guys have heard the term like scary dog privilege, and like how females usually are just like raised and born to know like not to walk home alone at night, just like don't go out at night by yourself. Like that's something we're kind of taught from a very young age. And so this film kind of reminds me of like the modern version, and like the modern perspective on it is like it upholds the themes, which also traces back to the Girls film, and how the timeline once again is like really long, and there's a lot of many years between these films, but just how throughout the years these like feminist messages are really important to hold on to.
Yeah, Darby, that's basically what I was imagining as well, seeing how all these directors that are separated by, I believe, 5 decades between each one, and how it's such a long time from our society from back then, we're still addressing and we're still challenging all these familiar themes of female agency and rebellion against these like societal constraints, and showing how much has changed over time, but yet there's so much that still remains the same in terms of gender expectations. There's still a debate for people that wanting to choose their career or choosing a family life as women, and there's always a one or the other. While compared to men are able to experience everything and all at once and still get praised for doing the smallest, littlest things. And it's just really empowered me as a woman in a male-dominated field, as a person in STEM. It's really able to not look at the struggle as a weakness, but to use that as an opportunity to continue challenging gender norms, and to overall continue what you really are pursuing and you're really interested in.
Yeah, I agree. Like, what I really liked about both these films is kind of just like how they don't make women like either the victims or the heroes. The characters just like feel real. I don't really like, like they're complicated. Like they're trying to go, like they go through tough stuff, but it still just feels like they have control over their choices. Like whether it's trying to balance like motherhood and their passion for art, or deciding who deserves to be killed or not. Like they have agency, and honestly, that just kind of depth in like the movies just feels so much more real than like the flat one, like just the flat portrayals of women that we see a lot in like these new mainstream movies.
Yeah, Apple, I completely agree. Like for me, like these films definitely demonstrated like the power of like female directors, of women directors, and how they like have reshaped their genres of film. Like in The Girls, it was like a drama, and in Amirpours, it's that horror. So like they definitely like took charge of this like film aspect and like made it their own. And it kind of made me wonder like what other women directors of like different cultures or time periods I've like been missing out on. And so yeah, I really appreciated how like each of these films told stories about like women's experiences in a way that was like very authentic. And it's not something that we see a lot in like even modern day cinema. We definitely still get that like filtered male perspective, especially because there still is so many male directors. So like these movies definitely showed me that like true authentic, like this is a woman's experience and it's coming from a woman. So you definitely like, I mean, as a woman myself, I definitely felt more empowered watching these films, and I really appreciated them a lot more than I have other films.
Yeah, so to wrap it all up, thanks for tuning into Real Talk today. Hopefully our conversation kind of shed some light on the cool ways that women directors like kind of have pushed back against gender norms in films over the years. And it was a great discussion, or so I thought it was a great discussion, and we appreciate you listening.
Okay, before we sign off, we'd like to share our works cited.
I did Mariah Larson, The Swedish Hotbed, My Zetterlings, The Girls, and Feminist Media Histories 2018.
My works cited is Mulvey Lara, The Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, Screen 1975.
My article is Sarah Pearson's Feminist Vampires Reconfiguring the Monstrous, Feminine and Contemporary Cinema, Journal of Film Studies from 2016.
In my film Zetterling Mai, the director, The Girls, Sanders, 1968.
And Anna Lilia Armirpours, who directed A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night by Spectravision in 2014. Thank you everyone for listening, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.